perspective of an international student to contribute to our dialogue as a diaspora throughout this semester. I myself am a fruit of mission through diaspora. I was born and raised in China and moved to Japan for the first time in my junior year of college. And I did a master's of degree in linguistics there. And I stayed in Japan for 5 more years to work as a software engineer. So I stayed in Japan for 8 years in total until I come here. In my 5th year in Japan, I came to faith in Christ. And 3 years later, when I was 30 years old, I decided to respond to God's calling to quit my job and go to the seminary in the hope of doing full-time ministry in the future after graduation. So please note that what I will be sharing today will bring together the experiences of being an international student both in Japan and in the States, and both in a secular education setting and in a seminary setting. So my talk is divided into 2 parts. One, I will generalize the situation of this subgroup of international students in diaspora with great trepidation, because how dare me to generalize such a complex and diverse group in any way from any angle. That's why I'm saying I'm with great trepidation. 2, I'll be sharing something about my own experiences. First of all, what does it really mean to be an international student? Personally, I think it means loss, many kinds of loss in the first place. Loss of home, familiar food, daily life, family, social supports, sense of belonging, social identity, connectedness, self-confidence, and also a loss that I want to emphasize today, a loss of language. Perhaps you may question, you came abroad, you studied and use a 2nd or 3rd language, or maybe 5th for kind of language of, but it seems to be an addition, not a loss. But the fact is, many international students are quiet, are reticent, are even muted because of various reasons. First, speaking a foreign language is very energy consuming. Concentrating on a 1-hour-long class is way more tiring for international students than native speakers. Also, it's not uncommon at all that someone who speaks beautifully and who speaks just daily speech like chanting a poetry in his mother tongue can only speak at the elementary school level when he speaks English. And for that very reason, even being ridiculed by his or her classmates for the accents or less sophisticated spoken expressions. Then what about our first language? Well, unfortunately, not good either. There has not been as much research done on studying the effects of second language acquisition on the first language as there has on second language acquisition itself. But I would argue that our mother tongue will be degraded after a long time living in second language environments in a way like this. For example, I learned the word upset in English, so I learned to mark certain emotions that I have as upsetness. So when I recapture this emotion of upsetness when I'm back in my native tongue's environments, how do I communicate that to those who don't know the English word upset? This can be called encoding in linguistics. So for international students, even their life memories are multilingual. Some memories are stored in English, some in Japanese, some in other mother tongue, so which will inevitably create separation between different life stages, laying the groundwork potentially for a cultural identity crisis. Another challenge that international students particularly face is the sense of liminality or temporariness of studying abroad. Because they know that the pursuit of this academic degree during these years is only temporary. So if my program is only here for 2 years, then I probably won't buy a rice cooker with a 10-year warranty. This affects satisfaction with life to much extent. And because of the policies of receiving international students in some countries, they could also lack a civic life and social engagement. And during this liminal time, they are detached from their home country. So they have no idea of being fully present in the here and now either. And when they return to their home country, they need to adjust and acclimate with the mentality of entering into a new country again, because home is no longer home for them. And besides those, I would like to spend the rest of my time talking about 2 particular reflections on myself, and that perhaps other international students won't resonate with. And these 2 points, interestingly, pull me to different opposite directions that create a chronic tension in me. One is to be a Chinese in Japan for 8 years, as a minority in this mono-ethnic country, along historical grudges between Japan and China, and assumed dichotomy between authoritarian, a liberal, communist China, and the democratic liberal West. I've never seen anything positive about my home country on TV or in any news media in Japan. And I experienced hostility from Japanese, Taiwanese, Hong Kongese, and all kinds of people just because I'm Chinese. And even Chinese immigrants in Japan towards Chinese people from mainland China. It seems I have no choice as long as I'm not praising capitalism and free human rights. I'll be seen as defending authoritarianism. Because some xenophobic ideology holders believe that even Chinese people who go abroad are still tied to or shaped by mainland China ideologies. I can still sense this lingering Cold War mindset, as in the same logic of what Francis Fukuyama argues, that human history follows a linear progression from authoritarianism to liberal democracy. I can't agree with the authoritarianism of my home country's government at all, but I'm even less able to agree with this assumed dichotomy or this Fukuyamian idea that Western liberal democracy is the final or perfect form of human government. China's political system does not mean that it cannot nurture or nourish liberal ideas. I also have friends located in Western world who think of themselves as having escaped the darkness of authoritarian China to become freedom, democracy fighters in the West, which I can't fully agree with. I've also heard Chinese Christian friends located in mainland China say that the only part of China they're proud of is Chinese underground church, which I can't really agree with either. So I seem to have become this so-called double dissident. I'm losing my sense of belonging to any group. I remember when I was in Japan, I internalized this inferiority so much from everything above. I was very ashamed of being a Chinese. And because of this hostility towards China, what I did was to try to please people who were hostile to me, to try to separate myself from where I was from, to try to prove that, yes, I was Chinese, but I wasn't the typical Chinese person that you think I am. So then I cut myself off from my origin and tried to be as Japanese as I could. And when I was in public settings, I tried my best to avoid any kinds of social interactions and just look at my phone for the whole time because I was afraid of people knowing or judging me as Chinese. I was so curious. I was just once upon a time so curious about how it feels for someone who can proudly say where he or she is from when he introduces himself. Well, on the one hand, I experienced this disconnectedness that I couldn't find a place to belong. On the other hand, the experience of studying abroad kind of fixed me to conform to a very homogeneous system. Oftentimes, I just reflected on my motivation for coming to America to study theology. I asked myself, if I was chasing after a prestigious education, and if such a hierarchy of prestigious or less prestigious education exists in the gospel, and if my motivation for coming here was just self-centered. International education does not necessarily produce cosmopolitan citizens. I remember taking a wine class in college in the days when I was far from being a believer. When I was learning from a British professor what was good wine and what was not, now I have come to the States to study theology, and my American professor teaches me what is better theology and what is not. International education homogenizes people from different backgrounds into a highly unified set of evaluation standards. So I asked myself, am I here learning to really appreciate multiplicity or diversity without hierarchy, including the heritage I carry with myself? Or is it just another elitism under the veneer of Christianity? Or am I in fact just contributing to the multiplicity that American students can benefit from in their educational environments at the expense of my own true uniqueness? This is my ongoing self-question. Sorry, I'm concluding. Maybe what I just shared is not a happy story, but for all the struggles and difficulties that international students face, the hope I see is really a story that happened to me, which is that I came to Christ. As I said at the beginning, I'm a fruit of diaspora ministries, and I'm now the first and only Christian in my family, which is crazy. Today, the way I would like to contribute to our topic of diaspora is to encourage you to think that it's often said that diaspora people are good soil and open to the gospel, which is true, but their openness often derives from an alienation from their past. like tearing the flesh from the bones, and a serious doubt about what was familiar to them, even including their families. It derives from pain, from despair. Every story of conversion in diaspora is probably very sad. But can we stop sharing the gospel to diaspora people? Of course not. Everything I've said today only points to the fact that international students need the gospel so badly. And I can speak with conviction from my personal experience that all of the above, the wounds of loss, isolation, loneliness, and trauma from discrimination have a hope of healing in Jesus and only in Jesus. And lastly, I also really want to encourage my fellow international students to speak up and to be confident of who you are. When you don't know why you're here and what you're doing here, you don't know how much you've blessed this country and your American classmates by coming here.